Right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. I'm Alex O'Neill. I'm Agilio's head of compliance, and I'm joined by Dr. Amit Rai over there. Amit is a multi-practice owner, a dental legal consultant. He's been working on and off with me and with Agilio and formerly with Code for the last, is it about 5 years, Amit?
Yeah, 5 years. Yeah.
Something like that, and helps us out in many different ways. And as I said, obviously he's a multi-practice owner, so he's been on this journey of having one practice and multiple practices, and I think that's what today's about a little bit. It's about a journey. It's I was saying just before we started the webinar that I come from a family of dentists. I'm pretty much the only non-clinical person in the majority of my family, and the one thing we've always said in the family is that they don't teach you business at dental school. You're not taught. You're taught obviously all your clinical skills, and you have very good interpersonal skills with your patients. But that's different to say managing a team, or very different to managing a business. And there's so many aspects to managing, to setting up your practice, to setting it up for success as well. Because you can have a business that operates and wipes its face and makes you a little bit of money, or you can have a business that is really successful using tried and tested business theory and business tactics, and it's an interesting journey going from being an associate who has walked into the practice, done their dentistry and gone home, to taking out a mortgage and this being your business, and it lives or dies based on the decisions that you make. So hopefully what we're going to do today is I'm going to hand over to Amit, and we're going to give you as much information as we can in the space of about 45 minutes. And then we'll have a Q&A session, and we'll try and give you enough information to help you just start exploring and thinking about this journey. Obviously, recently we've had the change of, it's planning, isn't it? It's planning permission.
Yeah, planning consent. Yeah,
planning consent. We've had the change from the D1, the old D1 usage is gone, and we've now got the commercial E usage, which has opened up a whole range of locations and made it a lot easier to get consent for a practice, or easier than it used to be. So that is everything from me. I'm going to hand over to Amit, and he's going to run you through buying or setting up a practice in 2021. Okay, Amit, I'm just going to switch my camera off, and I'll be back in a bit.
Cool. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Alex. So yeah, that's what we're going to be talking about today, buying and setting up a practice in 2021. The aim of today is really to walk through the background and the steps that one would need to take when considering opening a new practice, or alternatively purchasing the goodwill of an existing business. In other words, buying a practice. So to kick off, this is me, and I'm a GDP with 18 years experience, who originally qualified from Manchester. I work currently, I see patients 3-4 days a week, and a large part of my practice now is limited to orthodontics, and I don't just mean the Invisalign. And I'm close to completing a postgrad diploma in ortho. I'm a multi-practice owner, as referenced by Alex, with my wife, and we've built everything carefully. We've been really meticulous in what we've done, because in the past I have been burnt as a director of a mini corporate, and I still bear some of those scars today. I'm in a much better place now, and I think it just shows me how important it is to plan, and how important it is to look exactly at what you're doing in terms of building practices, if that's the direction you want to go in. And all I'll say, in my opinion, is success does not equate to the number of practices you might own. So aside from owning or co-owning practices with my wife and doing the day job, I love my role as a consultant with Agilio, formerly Code, and also as a dental legal advisor to a number of organizations I've worked with in the past, have included the GDC and NHS England. I'm also an author, so I've written a textbook on dental foundation training, which is available in all good bookshops and on Amazon. And that's mainly from my time as a VT or a dental foundation program director in central London, around 5-6 years ago now. Outside of dentistry, I spend more time than I should every week on the amateur seven-a-side football circuit, on the pitches and leagues of West London, where I'm from. And I've recently taken up being a tennis coach, where I enjoy teaching my daughter's class. So let's get into it. First slide. Why be a practice owner? And I've just put some thoughts there. And I'll go through each one in turn, but I'll kick off with your desire to be a practice owner should be fueled by the correct reasons. Now, prior to this presentation today, I've seen, and I don't know about you guys, that there have been quite a few webinars on setting up a practice or how to acquire a practice, how to do this, how to do that. And I've listened quite closely to that because I'll be interested to hear what people say. And some of these points that I'm going to reference now are not, what I want to do is give you a real view, a real world view of what's involved and what considerations, what thoughts you should be taking. And in my opinion, the desire to be a practice owner should be fueled by the correct reasons from the outset, from the start, because, you know, it is a grueling, stressful place to be, and you need to be really, really risk tolerant. So if it's just about amassing money and being rich, then, you know, in dentistry, there's much easier ways to do that. In my opinion, being a long-standing, experienced associate at the same practice where you've built a name, built a reputation, and you've got a good pay scale from the principal, and you've got a good patient base, that's arguably going to be more profitable than being a practice owner. So if it's just for the money, I think it might not be for you. Typical presentations in the area in this particular field would say that being a principal is the destination point for most dentists. They graduate, you do foundation training, you become an associate, and that's where you need to get to, because that's what other successful people have done. But they do say that, to stay on as an associate or upscale as a principal, it might be a bad thing to stay as an associate. And I don't think that's the case. As I said, I think actually staying as an associate might be the smart thing to do, especially in this day and age, because being a principal is not the most profitable. And with the recent test case of vicarious liability, that's been in and spoken about in the press, principals are increasingly being held responsible for the acts and omissions of their associates. And so if it wasn't already stressful enough, there's a lot more coming. Owning more practices is not necessarily better than a few, especially since it increases the risk, and things like recruitment are going to be harder than a simple working principal model. So if you're a principal and a working dentist at that practice, clearly it's going to be easier than if you have satellite practices and if you need to recruit for whole teams, build whole teams in those practices. And aside from what you might learn at dental school or as an associate, the following aspects are fundamental things to learn as a new principal. So it'd be things like accounting, organizational behavior, HR, marketing, operations, and also ethics. Certainly, the advantages of being a principal would give you freedom to pick and choose your hours that you'd like to work. Recruit nurses to be able to work with you at that same time that you want to work. It allows you to be creative, to have a bit of artistic flair with a variety of different things, like even starting from redesigning your surgery, designing your practice logo, websites, the Instagram pages. There's a lot there that you could do. But certainly that's something to consider. And really, if that is your ambition, then for me, nothing was ever going to stop me being a principal. I wanted to be a principal, and that's exactly what I did as soon as possible. And so if it is for you, it's definitely the right step to take. Just think twice. So the two traditional ways of being a principal are either buying or setting up a squat. And with setting up a squat, as you can see here, you have the power to design what you want, where you want, completely from scratch. So again, you can put your own mark on the practice, have your own artistic flair, but it certainly is going to be more costly in the long run to set up a squat. Because if you think about buying a practice, an established practice that's already set up, it's got an established patient base, an established team, that's taken years to set up. That's taken years to become what it's become. And setting up a squat might be cheaper because all you're paying for really is the builders, the materials, and the things that you need to set up initially. But you can't really buy, despite what people say, that loyal patient base to your practice. That's going to be a lot more trickier. So in the long run, what people might find is, although setting up a squat might seem cheaper in the short term, in the long run, actually, it might be more sensible buying an established practice, or what we call a going concern. So, a trading business with an established goodwill. Clearly, setting up a squat, you'd need to look at things like location, demographics, and target population. But certainly don't fall into the trap of proceeding because of time pressures. It's worth waiting for the ideal location, as a suboptimal site might majorly impact your business in the long term. You should always choose a location that you know well, with a patient base for your target market. So it always pays to consider the demographics. So, for example, the age of your target market, whether they're commuters, and how well that fits in with what you're offering. So, for example, in the suburbs, on the weekend and evening appointments are going to be more popular, for example, for city workers. Although, since COVID, a lot of people are working from home. The other big thing to consider here is about an NHS contract. And one of the big questions is, how do I get an NHS contract, especially if you're starting out from scratch? Well, you can no longer just pick and choose where you want to set up and then justify to the NHS that you're deserving of that funding. Now, there is obviously a competitive tendering process where the need to set up a practice is pre-prescribed by the NHS. And these are usually areas of high need. And therefore, inexorably, your target patient base will have high oral health needs because of that need for care. And that doesn't necessarily translate well into a profitable business model, as UDAs are going to be much harder to perform and to complete. Courses of treatment are going to be harder to complete on patients who require disease stabilization first. There's also the point of the competitive tendering process. Although it's very hard, many critics also argue that it's a race to the bottom, as the lowest financial bid is partially favored by commissioners, as they are seen to offer better value for money to the NHS. So in my opinion, better opportunities to look out for would be not setting up a practice, but maybe where additional recurrent or non-recurrent funding or non-recurrent UDAs becomes available, that you can add to an existing practice, you can add to an existing contract to your team. That is probably the better way to go. And obviously, you'll be informed about that by your area team. For a tender, the commissioner will initially invite expressions of interest. Pre-qualifying questionnaires seek to demonstrate how contractors are to provide quality services that offer value for money. And in addition, you'll be expected to demonstrate within your kind of tender submission how you intend to deliver the proposed dental service in line with best practice. Due to the competitive nature of the process, again, providers are generally going to be expected to go above and beyond the minimum requirements. So in other words, operating at best practice. And the NHS will ensure that you're doing what you've promised on paper. So whilst you might be submitting a bid that you might think looks good on paper, it translating into the real world, it might be impractical. It might be a loss maker on a day-to-day basis. So you need to be super careful about what you're putting forward. Agilio software helps to avoid these common pitfalls by providing a tender writing service and reviewing service to improve the chances of members securing the tender that they want. If you are going to go down the route of an existing practice, so buying an established practice, you need to put in the graft of visiting different practices for sale, even if you think they might not be for you, because you're going to build up some experience. You need to do the hard miles to see what's on offer, what people are selling, how much they're selling for. Do a bit of homework, and certainly don't be enticed out of desperation by buying somewhere far away from your roots, or far away from where you feel comfortable, because it's all well and good having a practice, let's say in Scotland, that's really profitable and it's good value for money. But if you're not there, and if you don't have that link there to be able to show your face, to walk the floor, to do stuff, it's going to be difficult. Considerations for a practice would be transport links. How can patients get to you? For example, is it near a shopping centre? Accessible parking. So there needs to be parking for patients to attend. It's based on convenience. And also, what is your proposed business model? Is there another practice offering something similar, nearby? Are there any restrictions to you expanding? And I guess that all, it comes down to whether it's a freehold or whether it might be a leasehold opportunity. So what are the key steps towards practice acquisition? I've kind of summarized it in two here along this road. I mean, the first, which is obviously the exciting time, is where you've had an offer accepted, and then you've got to act quite quickly to appoint representatives. So the most important representative there would be a solicitor. And you can go by personal recommendations from other people, and it's usually someone, I would advise, that has got that experience with dental practice sales. That is obviously going to be really important as well, because they're going to be looking at doing the whole due diligence process of the documents and of the compliance and of any issues that have arisen from the practice or for the practice that you're buying. So that's going to be quite important there. The period of time between the buyer making an offer to purchase a dental practice and them actually completing the purchase has increased, mainly due to COVID, compared to, let's say, a couple of years ago. And an offer in principle from the bank in some cases is available prior to making an offer. However, there are noticeable delays recently, we're told, from buyers being approved for finance, and it's all down to the banks focusing on effort on government-backed loans to support their existing customer base. So they're going to be delayed themselves. And it's also related to underwriting teams not being physically present in the office, but again, working from home. But there are also delays in getting an offer and getting an offered loan to the point of money being drawn down, and so that will inevitably delay a sale. The requirements usually vary depending on which lender you might select, the buyer selects, but the buyers are usually encountering problems nowadays with obtaining a valuation, being provided with security documents, and obviously searches, because COVID-19 has obviously been causing delays, and these searches can take up to 12 weeks. So as I referenced before, I mean, what's important is to appoint a solicitor, but also an accountant. They are going to be especially specialist ones, so NASDA specialist dental accountants, let's say. They're going to be more costly, but they will pay for themselves over time. So it is important to surround yourselves with accessible specialist representatives. CQC registration, which Alex will be kind of covering in a couple of slides' time. The applications currently now for practice acquisitions, they used to take in the region of 8 weeks, but due to COVID, again, there's been a delay, and 16 weeks now is not uncommon. But it's also important that there's a DBS check for both the buyer and seller, and that tends to take some time as well. The important thing is that when a CQC application is submitted with an understanding of the anticipated timeframe for completion of a transaction, the application shouldn't be submitted too early or too late, because most people would assume, you submit something early, that's a good thing. But if you submit a CQC application too early for a practice that you're going to acquire, they might not keep a pending registration in place. The assessor, the CQC assessor, they may just say, look, time's up, time to require a second application if the completion doesn't take place in time, basically. But the solicitors acting for both buyer and seller can help set a time frame that should help with that. Other things between a buyer and a seller and their solicitors are outstanding responses to inquiries and communication. That often causes delays. So the seller might not be aware, for example, that the buyers are waiting something from them because there's so many questions going back and forward on email. And obviously that combined with setting up and combined with running a practice, is not easy. So combining clinical duties with buying and selling practices obviously is going to be difficult. So that's why it's good to have a good solicitor. So business planning is the next slide that I'm going to cover. Dentistry has long been a green light sector for the banking profession, and in the current climate, the current economic climate, it will continue to be so. So healthcare is certainly in the lower quartile of the risk profile sector. And most dentists, most practice owners have experience with writing business plans to secure that initial funding that they need to draw down on when, for example, they make an extravagant purchase, or, for example, even when they're buying the practice initially. But how many principals will maintain that business plan? Research has shown that not many would if you asked them. However, research has shown that businesses that create a business plan, and execute on it, including regularly reviewing it, are consistently more successful than those that don't. So keep in mind that 60%, so 60% of businesses fail within 3 years of opening, and 20% within the first 12 months. So you don't want to be one of them. And reasons for failure include things like not understanding simple business concepts, not having a business plan, and also there being cash flow problems. And obviously having cash reserves are important, especially with a squat practice, because if you've got very limited bums on seats in the waiting room, you've not got your diary, your day list very full. Where are your reserves to pay your staff to keep it going? Obviously one of the most important things for a new practice is to always have that light on, so passers-by know that you're open, and it's important that you've got that cash reserve to kind of pay your staff with. So business plans are an invaluable strategic tool that help businesses towards long-term growth and success, and they're usually requested by lenders to help receive your funding to get your practice up and running. Alex?
Just a thought there, where I thought that might be quite important is, earlier on where you were saying that it could be, if you're if you're a well-established specialist, etc., then financially you could potentially be better off than maybe a practice owner. I think also that, but I do think that with strong business planning, and you tell me what you think, with strong business planning and literally 5-year business planning that could involve one or more practices, you could actually reach a point of financial freedom where where actually you're making a significant income by not working.
Yeah.
So for some people, and I think it's a conversation you and I were having the other day, where some people will say, I want to open a practice and I want to be successful. And the interesting question there is, what is success to you?
Yeah.
Because everyone will have a different answer to that. And some people, success is being able to spend 3 days a week with their kids and something like that. So I think with a strong, I completely agree with you on the planning. And I think so many people create their business plan to pass CQC inspection or something like that, and then it just goes in the bin. And this is something that they've paid their accountant a fortune for. But if you take those concepts and you consistently plan the next year, the next 2 years, the next 3 years, what you might find down the line is you own 2 practices and you don't have to work.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because people read a lot, like, for example, Rich Dad Poor Dad. They hear a lot about passive income, buy-to-let properties, but and even me, like in my younger days, I would think, that's the way to go, passive income. But in reality, on ground level, you never stop thinking about your practices, and especially with risks around the corners, the duty of care for your employees, caring for patients, having complaints coming through the door, and even this vicarious liability bombshell. All of the key moments in my family life, I can recall having a laptop open. And it's not.
That's true. It is true. You can never fully switch off from it. Absolutely.
And it's
I remember being on holiday. I remember always being on holiday, and there was always some call that someone in the family needed to deal with. Anyway, I will just drop off again. But I just thought it's, for me,
it's good.
Business planning and the strategy is just so core.
Yeah.
And it's the difference between a great business and a practice that is almost like being self-employed, but you're almost the same as an associate. You're just working and working and working on the treadmill and making yourself the money.
I agree.
Anyway, I just thought I could add a little bit of value there.
No, you did. No, thanks for that, Alex. So I've written here on the presentation 10% deposit because back in the day you didn't need a deposit to purchase, for example, an established dental practice, especially with an NHS contract, because the thinking was, that the bank said, well, that's what we can hang our hat on, that's really what we need. Gone are those days now. So what I'm hearing is that a 10% deposit is needed to secure a loan on on a practice. And certainly your business plan is going to be scrutinized by your lender. So you've got to make sure that it obviously is written in the proper way. One of the most important sections is the executive summary, because that comes first. So essentially what you're doing is you're convincing the bank, you're convincing other people to back your business, your business model. So that's obviously quite an important part of it. We're going to go to the next slide. Next slide is on squat. So if you were setting up a squat, what kind of considerations you'd need to have there. And just as Alex referenced, in the intro to this presentation, historically buildings or extensions to existing buildings have always required D1 planning permission for use as a dental practice. However, on the 1st of September last year, that changed. And there were changes to the town country planning use classes system, which came into effect last year. And that saw several use classes, including D1, being revoked and then replaced by new classes, including one whole new class called an E class or Class E. So you can tell I'm not a Mercedes-Benz driver, but it's a Class E for commercial uses coming into play. And part of that was just to shake up the high street. So for instance, you would have a building that can be used flexibly for different purposes at the same time concurrently, allowing different uses to take place, for example, at different times of the day. So that makes it a lot easier for us now, for people who want to set up and run a practice from a new location when it becomes available, for example, on the high street. So that's obviously quite a big change. And as a result of that, that's really saw a lot of people thinking, well, actually, why don't I set up a squat practice? But you've got to start thinking about the market research involved about whether it's the right place to set up a practice. Other considerations are things like disability access. So you would need to be fully disabled access to have a new build now. You need to consider things like HTM 0105, so the setup and the design spec of your practice. Does it have a purpose-built decontamination room? And surgery setup definitely is a bugbear of mine. I hate it when you get companies coming in designing a surgery and it looks good on paper, but for me as a practicing dentist, the bit behind the chair and the bit between the cabinet and the head of the chair is always not enough. You need more space there to maneuver around, to basically get all your instruments, your tools, to be able to turn around. So that obviously it's very important points that you'd need to consider there. You need a reliable team of builders, of planners, people to help you, because it's not, I've heard loads of stories where I've had colleagues who wanted to set up a practice. They've had a plan, they've paid a deposit to a builder, and then for whatever reason, it falls through. You need to have reliable people, so check references. And it's always good, again, to get a specialist builder, a builder who's got experience with managing a dental practice or setting up a dental practice. Otherwise, you're going to spend half your time managing them, which is not where you want to be if you're seeing patients and doing the day job. And then you've got to look forward to the inspections. And we're not just talking about, for example, NHS England or the CQC inspecting, but also passing building control. So there's certain things there that you'd need to pass through to be able to get your brand new building to current standards. Regarding compliance, what I'm going to do is, I thought it'd be silly not to pass over to Alex here, because Alex clearly is the expert here in the room. What I'm going to do is pass over to him to kind of cover this whole thing about CQC, compliance systems, setting up systems, because genuinely I think there's a lot there, and iComply has such a big brand name that Alex will be able to walk us through it in a bit more detail.
Thank you, Amit. I wonder what you think of this. I remember when I opened. Obviously, I've been in dentistry since I was 16, on and off. So it's about 24 years on and off doing stuff in the profession, and I've been involved in a number of new practice builds throughout the years. And the one thing I always think is, ask your builder how long it's going to take, get that quote, add 4 weeks. On top of it, because there's always snagging, there's always something, and it never ever is ready on the date that they originally say. And oh, I think we just had a pop-up on the screen. So obviously we've been helping practices out for about 40 years or so, and we have a range of services from NHS tendering to CQC registration for our iComply members. We've got iComply, we've got our iLearn CPD, formerly IceFarm, and we've got the iTeam, which we've just launched a new software, which is, if you're setting up a new practice, is fantastic. If I let's say I set up a new practice and Amit came to work with us and I added Amit, it will tell me exactly what documents I need to get for him, which is ask a practice manager how hard it is to remember every single time what documents you need to get for a new. Actually, ask Amit, a practice owner. Amit, how hard is it to remember all the things you need to put on file for a new practice owner, for a new practice team member?
Yeah, nightmare. And also it's about chasing that up as well, because dentists lead busy lives, and obviously they're going to forget. They're going to obviously be busy doing the day job. So yeah, it's good to have that reminder.
So yeah, if anyone does click on that link, by the way, you'll be taken to a page that has stuff about Agilio One, which is one of our services. But if you just fill the form out, then someone can give you a call. So just ignore the bit where it says about Agilio One, unless that's what you're interested in. But our team can talk to you about any of our services. So on this slide, I mean, this slide is effectively about 8 webinars in one slide. So I probably can't say too much on everything, but the CQC registration process, Amit covered the sort of the largest thing there, which is the time frame involved, and to think about this and consider this at the same time as you are writing your business plan, or you're putting your offer in on a going concern, or you're planning when you're going to open your practice. Because otherwise what can happen is you can do all this work, get your practice perfectly ready, say for a squat practice, and then you go, right, now I need to do CQC registration. And I've had numerous people call me up over the years and go, well, how can I get my practice? I'm ready to see patients. Can I get it open? And that takes, historically, the registration process has been 10 to 12 weeks. Recently, it's been running to 16 weeks. And then in order to do that registration, the registered person, whoever that is, depending on your business model, different registered people. If you're a sole trader, it's you. If you're in a real partnership, it'll be whoever you decide in the partnership. But they need a countersigned CQC DBS check, and that can take up to 8 weeks. So 24 weeks if you don't have the DBS check. So you need to be thinking of this right at the beginning and not at the end, because otherwise you can have your practice ready to open and you've got to wait 5 months to get it open. So that's my main point I'd say on that. We also have we did a webinar on CQC registration and CQC registration and registered manager interview, which is really, really important. The key point being there that as an associate, generally speaking, a dentist has very little to do with compliance, and the CQC know this, and they're quizzing you on the regulations, so you need to prepare. So we do for our members, if you're an iComply member, we have a CQC registration service that people can pay for, and we will do complimentary half-an-hour sort of interview coaching. But there is also a webinar that I've done on this. So if you go on our Agilio webinar page or type in iComply CQC registration and interview into YouTube, you should be able to find the webinar there. So we do have a webinar on that as well. The CQC, when you're setting up your practice, you've got to, if you've got an NHS contract, the NHS contract actually says in it you have to have a governance system, clinical governance system. The regulations which we're held to, which is part of the Health and Social Care Act 2008, the fundamental standards, which came out in 2015, they say you have to have a governance system in. This governance system has to be based on quality assurance principles and lead to continuous improvement. If you watch pretty much any webinar I've ever done on compliance, I go through that stuff consistently. If you watch our audit webinar or our risk assessment, I talk about what quality assurance is and what continuous improvement is. And it's mostly about having policies and procedures, making sure they're reviewed on, say, an annual basis or something like that, which some people sometimes get confused and they go, well, why am I doing a review when there's not been an update? Say at iComply, we've not released a new version of a template, and people are thinking, well, why am I having to do an annual review of this? It's because the way you operate your practice will change through just natural evolution. You will deviate from your processes, and you need to write that back into your process on an annual basis. Otherwise, you have a written procedure that does not reflect what is happening in the practice, and you want to avoid that. So you'll do that. You'll do audits and risk assessments to make sure that people are following your standards, that are following your procedures, your policies and your procedures. That's mostly what audits and risk assessments do. They pick up on problems, and then sometimes what you then actually need to do is then, based on what you found in the audit, you need to make changes to your policies and procedures, or you need to retrain people. So that's kind of what quality assurance and continuous improvement is about. Leadership knowledge, I said that before, as someone moving from being an associate to being a principal, you really need to know these regulations inside out and back to front. So that webinar that I've got on CQC registration actually covers the interview process and what my recommended reading would be for you in order to gen up, to become to pass that interview, to be able to manage the regulated activities and practice values and cultures. Especially if you're setting up a new practice from scratch, or if you're buying a practice, it's a good time to really set values, and I mean real values. These are our practice values, and one of those practice values could be we operate a quality dental practice. We make sure that we're meeting the legal minimums, which, to be honest, at the end of the day, compliance has a bit of a bad name in dentistry sometimes, but generally what it is just evidencing that you're doing the bare minimum that you legally are required to do. So if you can set these cultural things from the beginning and you can embrace them in your team, then you can set your practice up for life. And honestly, practices that embrace compliance, having inspected probably, I don't even know how many practices myself, if I can walk through the front door and I can tell you what you are like as an owner, what your team are like, and your opinion on compliance probably within 5 seconds of walking through the front door, because the practices that embrace this feel light and breezy, and they're nice places to work, and the principals who have these values are good people to work for. And especially, say, post-COVID, post-Brexit, we're struggling to get to recruit and retain good people. So you want your practice now needs to be more attractive to employees and to associates than it's ever been before. So just running through quickly, setting up a compliance system, just some key points that you want to go through. There's a lot of people that you have to assign responsibilities. You need a complaints manager, you need an infection control lead, you need potentially you might need a data protection officer, you might need, there are many roles and responsibilities, a safeguarding lead, and you want to decide these from the beginning, because these are the roles and responsibilities that you're then going to write into your policies and procedures. And writing policies and procedures and keeping them up to date obviously is something I'm very familiar with, and I've done it as a practice manager, and I've done it as a head of compliance in a corporate, and I'm now doing it or assisting the team and supporting the team to do it here at Agilio with iComply. And honestly, I am utterly biased, but I think on this point I'm very objective, is I cannot see how anyone will operate a practice without outsourcing that to somebody. So I'd recommend, obviously, I'd love people to come on board with us and get iComply. We've got 2,000 practices, and we've got the investment from August, and obviously we're Agilio now. We're getting bigger and stronger, and we've got a lot of expertise. So I'd like you to come on board with us, but you need to go on board with somebody, is what I'd say, because it is constantly there's new guidance. We've seen it with COVID in the last year with SOPs, guidance coming out all the time, policy and procedures having to be updated, reviewed. So I'd recommend going with somebody. You want to make sure your risk assessments are in place from day one, your Legionella risk assessment, your health and safety risk assessment, your fire risk assessment, and your disability access audit, and especially if you're tendering, as we were discussing before, as Amit was saying before. So there are certain things that you need in place. The thing I'd say about those is make sure that the person who's doing it is competent. There's a lot, I've been into a lot of practices, and I've seen risk assessments or audits that are done by people who have no risk assessment training, no audit training, and they'd maybe pass a cursory glance, maybe even pass a CQC inspection glance. But if the HSE got hold of them, or the Equality Commission got hold of them, they're coming to you and they're questioning you. So consider outsourcing to a company to do those for you. Logs and checklists and posters are certain things you have to have in place. I can't go through all of them, but you need your autoclave logs. You need to have your GDC standards poster on the wall. You need to have a complaints procedure on display. You need to have a price list displayed somewhere. There's a whole list of things that you need to have, and you probably want advice on where to go there. And then you need to have this all scheduled to make sure that everything, all of this collateral, compliance collateral, and all of these audits happen at the legal frequency that these have to happen, or at the expected frequency from the regulator. And then you've got to train your team to follow this system. Obviously, this is what we help with, and if you want to get in touch with us, you can. And the only other thing I'd add on that is obviously your information governance. I've just kind of put that separately, because having a whole set of documents set up for GDPR, and if you're a private practice that needs to refer into the NHS using NHS Mail, or if you are an NHS practice, you're going to need to do the DSP toolkit, which means you're going to need to do that online assessment as well. We've got a whole document suite that helps with this as well. But the key message is you need a system. I think trying to create one yourself is probably a lot. I think getting a manager who, you might find a really experienced manager who could do this for you, but I can guarantee you they're going to retire at some point, and you're going to, at that point, you're going to want to buy a system, because I see it happen every few months or so with practices. So that's just the whistle-stop tour of compliance. I hope that's helped.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Alex. So next slide I'm going to go through is defense against claims. So essentially, it's a lot more about insurance. And whilst being professionally indemnified is something, most of us dentists, most of us dental professionals don't think twice about, you might not necessarily be thinking about the risks about your dental practice and what they may face. So here's a kind of a quick list, a summary of the kind of insurance policy you'd need to take out. And what I'd say here is employer's liability insurance safeguards your practice against legal and compensation expenses from employees. But what is also important about it is it's essential, because if one of your employees falls ill or sustains an injury at work, you could be held liable. And public liability insurance covers you, for example, if a patient or a member of the public claims that they may have been injured. But all of these are obviously really important, which you need to consider, because especially with, for example, surgery insurance, you've got so many pieces of expensive equipment within practices, such as dental chairs, scanners, x-rays. It is important to be able to need to replace them if something untoward were to happen. So it's always better to be safe than sorry. This slide's about engaging and recruiting the best team. Now, employees are the single most important investment that any business makes. After all, your company, your practice is only as good as your members of staff, as the people that you recruit to be the faces of your practice. A global survey of workers in 18 countries showed that UK employees are below the average when it comes to rating their managers as effective. So clearly, having an effective manager, whether that's yourself or practice manager, needs to be some consideration for that, to be able to, I suppose, be an effective manager. It's important to be a people person. But it's always, as Alex said, it's always difficult to find good people. Brexit has caused a loss to the dental workforce. And that's further been compounded by the after effects of COVID, where, for example, for many, the PPE, the risks of contracting COVID, these were just a final straw for them to enter into a different industry and exit dentistry. So officially, in my opinion, dentistry is now a candidates market. So as a new practice owner, you've got to get your salaries and your pricing right. Whereas in the past, associates, hygienists, specialists would traditionally be hired via the BDJ Online, for example, and nurses via Indeed. There's now an increasing trend for the free-to-use Facebook dental recruitment groups, which are not set up by companies that charge, but set up by individuals, and they're free of charge to join, free of charge to post. And in the increasing world of social media, a lot of the candidates use it. So looking at one of the biggest groups, so British Dental Jobs on Facebook, you will see what candidates think about rates of pay being offered for roles, because they can comment on, for example, a job advert. So make sure you offer a competitive salary, and also even look at your benefits package. That's obviously going to be important. What's also important is ask yourself, would you work for your practice? So it is important, the outside perspective of your practice reputationally. And also values. So again, values are something that are really important to define. So what kind of values do you have in your practice? Is it diligence? Is it creativity? Is it quality? What would you value? And then that, ideally, you should stick to that. So even where you've got the opportunity to make money with a venture, or to, for example, get a really good member of staff at a cheap rate, you would always stick to your values. So it might be that, you would decline those offers or decline those opportunities if it's not consistent with your values of your practice. So I comply contracts are good because they're written by solicitors. They have a whole library of contracts you can use for different associate roles. And effective HR management, I think, is probably the biggest challenge for most practice owners. And I think using a digital HR system, so digitizing your HR system, is really important, because it kind of allows your employees, your team members, to book holidays without them clashing with each other, to prevent associates getting confused with annual leave entitlement. So it is definitely a good idea to invest in a digital HR solution. What type of solution that is, is clearly up to you. Agilio have their iTeam application, and that's the first of its kind to be a dental specific online HR solution. And they also have, what I thought was quite interesting, was a digital rota software coming soon, which I think is going to be a great help in terms of rotas, because obviously it's a rota system that is digitized. Investing in your practice. So once you have scoped out where you're going to set up, or once you've got your practice, what you're going to be looking at is obviously to see whether you would like to invest. And some of the figures I found surprising are, obviously Invisalign's big now, but what I didn't realize was using an iTero scanner increases Invisalign cases, I'm told, by 75%. And for some of us, the cost of getting an iTero scanner is going to be prohibitively expensive, especially if it's not going to be used primarily by yourself in a working principal practice. But in a satellite practice, it may not be the best way to go. But that's something that you need to consider in your business model. But it's an expensive outlay. Other things that are expensive would be things like CBCT scanning machine. So what there is at the moment is something called the AIA, which is a 100% capital allowance, allows for 100% capital allowance for qualifying expenditure on plant and machinery. And prior to 2019, the AIA, or the annual investment allowance, was set only at 200K, which meant that you can only deduct a maximum of 200K from your profits as capital expenses. However, since the 1st of Jan, AIA has been temporarily increased to 1 million. And that staggering rise has meant that limited companies can theoretically spend up to 1 million on capital expenditure and subtract 100% of it from your profits, and that is available, to be used now currently, as announced since last year. That is still applicable. So that's going to be something to potentially take advantage of, and identifying which items are capital expenses and which aren't can be tricky, especially because the HMRC doesn't provide a particularly clear guide regarding the nature of various assets and expenditures. But whilst the AIA does give a business a great opportunity to invest in capital expenditure and minimize their tax liability, you need to pay heed to the deadline and application of the allowance, and that's where your accountant would come into it. I've also written here, buy used, buy twice. The bargains you can get on used dental equipment sites, for sure, but you'd have to also pay consideration to whether they come with any form of warranty and what would happen after you pay, and something goes wrong. You may have to invest again in another piece of machinery. So my final slide is about COVID and the effect of COVID in the current work, in the current practice, I suppose, practice sales and purchases landscape, and current findings during practice due diligence processes for the purposes of practice valuations have revealed that practices are now generating between 80% to 110% of pre-lockdown revenues. So profitability is equal to or has improved compared to pre-lockdown. Many practices have increased patient fees, and a lot are making better use of their time and space, and also utilizing more digital options for things like remote consultations. But the other key is that patients have now developed an increased demand for services. So there's this thing called the Zoom effect, where a lot of members of the public are working from home. They can see themselves, as I'm seeing myself now speaking, and you kind of see yourself on the screen. What do your teeth look like? It's in your face all day long in terms of all meetings and things about what your teeth look like. And so a lot of people, combined with the fact that they're saving money on holidays and going out, have got a lot more money to spend on cosmetics, and so there's a 300% increase since 2019 on things like in demand for Invisalign. So clearly there's this Zoom effect where you've got an increased trend for cosmetics and Invisalign, and certainly this has provided a boom for most practices to be able to do things like that. But also this has provided a bit of uncertainty around NHS dentistry as well going forward, as we enter the the post-COVID phase. Alex.
Brilliant, thank you, Amit. I think I think we're over to me at this point, right?
Yeah. Thanks, Alex.
Yeah, fantastic. No, I was just checking I was coming in at the right point. No, so thank you, Amit. I mean, what a great presentation! So dense, so much information. And it's. And we don't claim to have all the answers either, even though there's so many things we could tell you. But I think part of this journey of opening a practice is you're back into research mode. You're back into when you were studying for your exams or learning a new topic at university. You want to be getting as much information as you can, and from as many sources as you can, and triangulating and synthesizing and just listening to all the messages, all the information that's out there. I really liked what you said about values. I thought that was fantastic. I've as an ex-practice sort of management consultant, I've told more than one principal historically that the reason that their team are leaving is because they're saying that the particular thing are their values. For example, we really value people's time, and then they're running late every day and making their nurses work through every single lunch break. And I've seen someone just lose amazing nurses time and time again just because of something as simple as that. Just incongruence with espoused values. I thought that was brilliant. Also, what you're saying about the using the Itero scanners. I think there's people out there. There's like Adam Nolte, and you've got Marcus White, and people out there who have put this right into the center of their patient journey. If everyone, very quickly, if you want to move over to the handout guide, we have we just released it this minute, the Agilio 34-page setting up a new dental practice guide that we've been working on for about the last month or so. So please, everyone, if you'd like to go over to the handout guide, you're the first people who have. We finished it this morning. We've been working right on deadline to get this done, and it's 34-page guide covering a lot of the topics Amit has just covered for you. So please download it. Feel free to share it if you want to. Feel free, if you any feedback you want to give us on it as well. We're always open to feedback. That's what we're about. So I hope that helps. And thank you, Amit, again.